This is a show about authentic, deep connection to the liminal spaces. Join me and my guests as we explore the boundaries between the expected and the unexplained, between the living and the dead, between heaven and earth, between everyday life and the initiation into the unseen realms. Welcome to Mysteries, Graveyards, and the Human Psyche. I'm your host, Melissa B. In this episode,
and my adrenaline was racing because my first thought was like, somebody's in the apartment, and you think, oh my God, am I going to be a crime victim or something?
Ghosts. People have been telling each other ghost stories for centuries, first around the campfire and now on HD TVs. Virtually every culture has art, literature, and music devoted to these apparitions, these disembodied spirits that have come back to the living realm from the land of the dead. We've heard that they come from beyond the grave to exact revenge, or because their grief is unresolved. But despite this treasure trove of stories about ghosts, when we ourselves encounter one of these spirits in our waking lives, we are caught off guard. This is because there's no context. It comes out of nowhere. We don't know the backstory of their untimely death. We don't know why they're there or how to mollify them. When the world of the spirits suddenly enters our world for a brief period of time, it takes us more time to process what just happened. No doubt, we will be questioning our senses. And when we try to tell others what has happened to us, they will be questioning our senses too, and maybe even our grip on reality. That's why I started this podcast, because it can be hard to explain how encountering a ghost yourself is unlike anything that you've seen on TV or in the movies. And that's why tonight my guest will explain how his visit to London exited the expected and entered the unexplained. Anthony Picco is an astrology teacher, an astrologer who's been giving readings for over 30 years. He's a visual artist, a graphic designer, and the host of a wonderful podcast called Cosmic Tuesdays, which gives voice to all manner of metaphysical practitioners and students. Let's listen now to Tony's story.
But I'll preface it by saying it was sort of weird is that for years before I went to London the first time, which was actually in 86, although the story I'm telling is from 2004, I constantly dreamed of being in an airport trying to get to London. Over and over I had these dreams. So I guess I must have some sort of karmic connection there. I don't know. But so in 2004, my wife blessed me with a ticket to London. She saved up some money and as a gift sent me to London, and for about 2 weeks, and I was going to be staying at her boss's apartment in London, and he shuttled back and forth from New York to London in his business, and he wasn't going to be there while I was there, so I went to stay in his apartment, and it was an old building. In the United States, I always think we think our buildings are really old because they're 300 years old, but in London, in England, buildings go back 800, 900 years and more. So this one particular building was probably about 400 or 500 years old. It was an apartment building off Trafalgar Square. And, I was always told, I had this psychic teacher I had named Suzanne Northrup, who told me that she said England was full of ghosts, is the way she put it. So I didn't expect to meet any, but that's what she told me before I headed over. So as it turned out, my wife's boss's apartment was kind of a small place. It was a little tiny foyer and a bedroom and a little tiny kitchen and a little tiny kind of office room. And the bedroom is right off the foyer. The foyer was like a little square area right inside the door. And The bed was sort of perpendicular to that doorway. And I mention this because it all ties into what happened to me. So the first night after I'd been around a little bit, I'm sitting the bed looking through tour guides and trying to decide what to do. And out of the corner of my eye, opposite the doorway on the left wall was a TV set, a small TV set. And I saw something moving in the TV set, reflected, and the TV set was not on. I didn't turn the TV on, and I'm like, I sort of jumped for a second, and I looked into the doorway where the foyer was, and I didn't see anything. And then I looked back at the TV set, and it was blank again. This happened in like a millisecond. It was just sort of like, huh, what was that? What? And I was kind of confused, and my adrenaline was racing because my first thought was like, somebody's in the apartment. And you think, oh my God, am I going to be a crime victim or something? But there's nobody there. And then when I really kind of focused on what I saw in the TV set, it looked like a guy from the waist up only. And he was wearing like a white powdered wig and dressed in that particular era of a gentleman from London. And he had his arms crossed and he was sort of looking back and forth. And I just was like, what? And I'm like, well, I'm tired. I don't always jump to assuming it's something mystical. I always try to eliminate like, well, was I tired? Was I beaten? I'm like, I calmed down. I got up, actually. I made a little sandwich or something because I was so wired from the adrenaline. Then I went back to sleep. I went into the bed and I got to sleep. So the next morning I went out and literally wandered around London for almost 8 or 9 hours, just walking, and I would do stuff like take the underground from one neighborhood to another, just walk until I came across another underground station. So by the time I got back, I was pretty beat. And what happened was I had walked through the foyer, dumped my coat off because this was like late December 2004, on the chair in the foyer, and walked over and plopped horizontally across the bed, as opposed to the direction the bed was going. And it was the kind of bed that was on one of those metal springs. So when I plopped, you hear like and it was rocking back and forth a little bit. And I mentioned that because it was still moving when what happened next happened. So I clearly hadn't fallen asleep. And as I'm lying there, I hear like 5 footsteps. There's a brief pause, and somebody landed on top of me, but there was nobody there. And it kind of knocked the wind out of me, but not in a physical way. It wasn't like, but there was something about it where I just felt kind of like, what the heck was that? All of my cells were tingling. It's a really, I can't really almost explain it. It's like all my cells were vibrating and tingling. And I was just aware of kind of like, I don't want to use the word possessed because 1, it sounds like a monster movie. And 2, I wasn't possessed exactly, but somebody was connected to me in a way that I can't explain. And I became very aware of the sensation, not exactly the words, but the feeling of like, get out, not in one of those monster movie, like get out kind of things, but it was very much, I felt like you don't belong here. And I thought to myself, and I look, I was quick on my feet. I don't know if somebody told me this was going to happen beforehand, I don't think I would have been as calm. But I thought to myself, this is the guy that still lives here from like 500, 300, whatever years ago it was. And so I just took kind of a deep breath. And in my head, I kept repeating like, thank you for letting me stay here. I really appreciate your hospitality. I'll be leaving in a few days. I know I'm an American, but I really love London, and and I was just trying to send like really calming kind of things. And in about 3 to 5 minutes, it faded. It kind of slowly faded away, and I didn't have any problem for the rest of my visit, And it was kind of, I guess I reassured him. I don't know, because I didn't see a ghost, but I sure felt the ghost. And I heard the footsteps, they were very clear. I wonder if the night before he was checking me out and then he sees he's back again. I'm going to have to do something about it. He jumped me from behind. I never saw his face. I'm sorry, officer. I can't give you a description.
He was only visible from the waist up.
Yeah, and from the waist up.
There are so little records about ordinary people.
Right,
who was
exactly.
This man in London that for whatever reason, he got stuck in between worlds, and he felt that he had to stay in that apartment, or his flat as they would call it there, and for
Protected,
whatever,
yeah.
for whatever reason, maybe it was a hard won place for him, and he wasn't willing to give that up.
Yeah, I mean, I admit I'm not a research kind of guy, but I suppose records are kept for long periods of time. So I imagine you could go to that apartment and find out who owned it. But you
So,
know,
in all of your experiences in life, and being an astrologer, being the host of your own radio show, and interviewing people who are interested in all of these, I guess you could say, esoteric or mystical types of topics, when you finally met the ghost, you felt that you were surprised and taken aback.
well, mostly because I've worked with a lot of psychics. I've certainly talked to a lot of people who had near-death experiences and stuff. So, and I've taken Silva Mind Control course, and I've learned to meditate, and I can be very intuitive. This is really the first phenomenon that happened that way, as a ghost. I mean, when I was a kid, back in the 60s, I gobbled up every Hans Holzer book, Holzer book I could get my hands on.
Welcome Dr. Hans Holzer to Kelly & Company. Are no such things as ghosts and all that either?
Oh, yes, there are ghost heavens, yes. I mean, that's the wrong word, perhaps, but there are ghosts. Well,
apparitions?
Apparition. Well, I have spent, I don't know how many years in parapsychology, and of course there are ghosts. And
can these creatures reach out and do you harm?
first of all, they're not creatures, they're
Not
people.
creatures,
Yeah,
they're
but
apparitions,
they're
ghosts.
not aware of you and I, barely aware, because they are so caught up in these are thought forms. They are part of the personality that stays behind when the physical body is dissolved, and it is not. These people are unable to cope with what they are. I mean, they're in trouble.
I've heard of Hans Holzer, but I never read any of his books.
He has books like The Ghosts of Ireland, The Ghosts of New York, The Ghosts, where he would go with a medium, often Sybil Leek, who was also a witch, but he would go with mediums too, and they would investigate places that were allegedly haunted. Often he would end his investigations by telling the entity, the ghost, whatever you want to call it, to go towards the light. Like, you're stuck here, you need to keep moving on, and a lot of times the hauntings would end after that. I guess because perhaps the soul, or the terminology is a little tough here, has moved on at that point. So it was a surprise to me, only because I had never had a ghost experience before that moment. Lots of other weird experiences, but not a ghost experience. And I've always believed in them. I don't know what they are exactly. I can't explain it, the mechanics of it scientifically, or what it is. And I do believe, actually, what we call ghosts may be 3 or 4 different kinds of phenomenon that we group together.
Like what?
Well, they call there's something called intelligent hauntings, and that's when the ghost is clearly aware of who's there and is communicating on some way, shape, or form. To me, the guy who jumped me in England was probably an intelligent haunting. There's another kind, I can't remember the exact terminology for it, but it's almost like there's an emotional tape recorder left behind, running over and over and over. So you might have a haunting where this ghost always comes out of the 3rd bedroom, walks down the hallway, and walks into the door, and that's all they ever do. And they never, like, if somebody goes and tries to get their attention, they don't recognize it. And some people have theorized that this person is no longer there, but they left behind, as best as I can describe it, a repeating ectoplasmic tape recording, usually emotionally charged. Like, it turns out that, she ran through that doorway when the building was on fire. So there's usually a strong emotional component to the repeating ghost pattern story. Whereas the intelligent hauntings, I knew somebody in Pennsylvania, they had an intelligent haunting. things would be picked up and moved and discovered in strange places. The pencil sharpener is on the stairway to the upper floor. Suddenly the radio turns on for no reason, and they go and try to turn it off, and it's still off. That kind of stuff would be considered an intelligent haunting, because it's definitely interacting in some way, shape, or form with the humans left behind. So to speak, So I think and I also have heard of, we always assume the place is haunted. But I have heard cases of entities, for want of a better term, that have attached themselves to people and followed them. So the ghost, or whatever you want to call it, is now attached to a person. As a matter of fact, Tom Green is a comedian who, he said at one point, before he became famous, he had taken a dare or something to spend the night inside a museum. And he cleared it with the museum people. He said, I'm going to spend the night there. And he had a little knapsack or whatever, sleeping bag. And he says in the middle of the night, he looks down the hallway and he sees somebody walking down the hallway. And whatever was there sort of looked at him and then vanished. Mm-hmm. And Tom Green implied that he felt like the guy saw him, and was maybe surprised. So he didn't really think anything about it. He wasn't a particularly mystical guy. I mean, he might have just been a little freaked at the time. And what happened was, a number of years later, I believe he was down in Costa Rica or a similar place, and he was swimming on the shore by himself, and like the riptide sort of pulled him out, and he was beginning to drown. And when he came to, because he started passing out, if I have the story correctly, he found himself up on the rocks, and he's like, I was passing out and drowning. Like, how did I end up on the rocks? And then what happened was the woman, I believe it was Kim Russo, a psychic, but I won't swear to it. She would contact celebrities to ask them about, did you ever have an experience that was, and she would try to explain it, and tune in. And she said that entity in the museum had been there since like 1903. Nobody until Tom Green had ever seen him. So when he realized that Tom Green saw him, he literally was like, I'm going with you wherever you go, kind of a thing. And she said that it was the spirit that actually saved him when he was drowning, that pulled him up onto shore. Of course, he was alone on the beach. He couldn't verify, did you see anybody dragging me? Nobody dragging me or whatever up the beach. So, I mean, this is what I'm aware of. I wouldn't call myself the end all and be all of ghost experts, but I've certainly been fascinated by it all my life. That's the most exciting ghost experience I've had. So,
Thank you for sharing it with us, Tony.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure talking to you, Melissa.
Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Mysteries, Graveyards, and the Human Psyche. Coming up next, we'll be talking to Karen Fraser and the importance of preserving sacred places.
When I'm gone, you can have my synthesizer.